Imagine a time when the very fate of a young nation hung in the balance. The year is 1791, and America stands at a critical crossroads, struggling to find its financial footing after the Revolutionary War. George Washington, the revered leader and first president, is eager to see his country thrive, yet he's caught in a web of powerful forces beyond his control. Enter the Rothschilds, a feared banking dynasty with an unmatched grasp of global finance, watching from across the Atlantic, waiting for the right moment to secure their influence. In this epic turning point, the Rothschilds orchestrate a cunning strategy that reaches across oceans and through back channels. They subtly maneuver through economic complexities, convincing Washington's closest advisors to support the establishment of a central bank, a move that promises prosperity but could bind the nation's financial future to foreign interests. This is the tale of how America's destiny was forever changed by those who saw opportunity in its infancy, a story of ambition, power, and the pursuit of control over the world's most promising new republic. America's first central bank. So in 1790, Secretary of the Treasury Alexander Hamilton submitted the proposal for the first central bank of the United States. The bank faced extreme opposition from people like Thomas Jefferson, who was the Secretary of State at the time. A quote by Jefferson said that a private central bank issuing the public currency is a greater menace to the liberties of the people than a standing army. We must not let our rulers load us with perpetual debt. $35 trillion later. Hamilton argued, quote, no society could succeed which did not unite the interests and credit of rich individuals with those of the state. A national debt, if not excessive, will be to us a national blessing. So George Washington, listening to both these arguments back and forth, and eventually Hamilton's argument prevails because he's supposed to be the money guy. He was a smart money guy, but there's also that rumor of him having connections to the Rothschilds. According to a book called No More Taxes by John Paul Mitchell, quote, the international bankers controlled by the Rothschild family had a secret agent in the midst of the American people. His name was Alexander Hamilton. He married into the Rothschild family on December 14, 1780, by wedding Elizabeth Schuyler. So Hamilton ends up winning. He convinces George Washington to issue a 20-year charter to the first central bank of the United States. The bank was given a monopoly on issuing banknotes and served as the federal government's official depository. It was required to redeem its notes in gold or silver, though it lacked sufficient reserves to fulfill all obligations. Now here's the real twisted part. So Dr. Thayer Watkins of San Jose State University claims that 70% of the central bank was owned by foreigners, and notes that Britain was the primary source of capital for the US during this era. Given that the US relied on British capital and British banks were dominated by the Rothschilds, it's safe to say that the family had substantial stake in the first central bank of the United States. Let's see, if Rothschilds have significant influence over the central bank, and the central bank has significant influence over the Congress, and the Congress has significant influence over the laws, then logical conclusion is that the Rothschilds were behind a lot of the lawmaking and policy decisions of the United States for this 20-year period. So let's see how this turned out for the people. Did it expand and grow the economy and help us build our industrial base, or did it lead to financial ruin? Here's some stats from the book The Creature from Jekyll Island. Within 5 years, the government used the system to borrow $8.2 million, with $6.2 million newly created for its use. This influx of new money into the economy caused inflation as the supply of money outpaced goods and services, leading to a 72% rise in wholesale prices. This inflation effectively reduced the value of people's savings by 42%, acting as a hidden tax on the people to the highest magnitude. So everybody hated this. They acknowledged it was not in the best interest of the people. And at the end of this 20-year experiment, January 24th, 1811, the vote on the charter was defeated by 1 vote in the Senate and 1 in the House. So that's 1811, and something significant happened in 1812. Oh yeah, that war that everybody overlooks, and nobody seems to have a good answer for why this war even started in the first place. That War of 1812. So here's an interesting thing that Nathan Rothschild was quoted as saying, allegedly, quote, either the application for the renewal of the bank charter is granted, or the United States will find itself involved in a most disastrous war end quote. Legend has it that Nathan then instructed the British to, quote, teach these impudent Americans a lesson, bring them back to colonial status. So the stated cause of this War of 1812 is British impressment of American soldiers. Impressment was the act of forcing men into military service, particularly in the Navy, through physical coercion or intimidation. So this sounds ridiculous to begin with, but it's even more suspicious due to the fact that France was doing the same thing, no consequences. The fact that a war happens the year after we decided to not extend our central bank charter, I don't think that's a coincidence. So what ended up happening was, since America's fighting a war and you can't fight a war without a central bank, without the ability to create money out of nothing, the government essentially needed state banks to create money for war expenses. So this resulted in the public losing approximately 66% of their money due to inflation during this time period. That's on top of the 42% that they had lost earlier from the first central bank of the US. So first central bank, boom, takes away 42% of the value of their money through inflation. And then out of the 58% they have left, they lose 68% of that. So they've essentially lost more than 75% of the value of their money within a 25 years time span. Disgusting. Think of this like a siphoning effect, almost like a blood transfusion of the 99% giving their blood to the 1%. It's not dollar for dollar taking your money, but taking the value of your money, extracting it from you and moving it over to these people over here. That's what's happening here. And still happening today. So because of the War of 1812, the national debt surged from 45 million to 127 million, tripling the money supply. So poor Jefferson's still one of the few people that's advocating this is crazy. Spending money on all these wars, inflating the money supply, this is going to be disastrous for future citizens in the next generation, and was advocating for sound money and the elimination of perpetual debt. So the Bureau of Public Debt reports that total debt increased from 45.2 million on January 1st, 1812 to 119.2 million as of September 30th, 1815. So in 3 years, the money supply tripled. It's worse than COVID. Keep in mind, there were no extra goods created. There was no extra services added. So the dollar literally lost between 1/3 and 3/4 of its value. 66 to 75% of its value. Poof, gone within 3 years. So because of all this debt, America was convinced that the best solution was to start a new bank charter. So in 1816, a second 20-year charter was given to the second bank of the United States. And you guessed it, again, the majority of the bank stock was held by foreign investors, the Rothschilds. So after the War of 1812, the country faced severe financial instability due to rampant fraud in banking, and Congress, they decided to protect the fraudulent banks by creating the second Bank of the United States in 1816 rather than allowing the free market to correct the problem. All this ebb and flow of the stock market, that's a product of the fact that we let individual people control the interest rates of the economy, the amount of money that's in the economy. So they want things to go up, rates down, inject money, things go up. If they want the stock market to go down, jack rates up, take money out. So people were disgusted by this, and by the 1820s, to a large degree, public opinion was on the side of what Jefferson was saying, and they were tired of this. So the Republican Party, surprisingly, was the one that was completely in favor of having a central bank mechanism. This outraged a few bold people like Andrew Jackson, Martin Van Buren, so they formed a coalition. And wow, how things changed. Andrew Jackson created the Democrat Party to oppose Central Bank of the United States. That he's turning over in his grave right now, seeing what's going on with the Democratic Party. So one of the key goals of the Democrat Party was to abolish the Bank of the United States. So Andrew Jackson runs for president in 1828. He wins, and he quickly begins building congressional support, advocating his case. And he comes in like an absolute bull in a china shop. You thought Trump was bold? So this is what Andrew Jackson comes in and says at his first State of the Union address. Walks in there, swagging out. Gentlemen, I've been a close observer of the Bank of the United States, and I'm convinced that you have used funds of the bank to speculate. When you won, you divided the profits amongst you. When you lost, you charged it to the bank. You tell me that if I take the deposits from the bank and annul its charter, I shall ruin 10,000 families. That may be true, gentlemen, but that is your sin. Should I let you go on, you will ruin 50,000 families, and that would be my sin. You are a den of vipers and thieves. I've determined to rout you out. And by the eternal ether of God, I will rout you out. And he bangs his fist on the table. Boom, bah. So comes in with that bold statement. And that's a dangerous thing to say at the time, because a lot of people in Congress and the media, they're rolling in the dough, because as long as they stay on the side of the money printing machine. The good times keep on rolling. This is almost a 30-minute long episode, but I decided to split these two in half because this is the first central bank of the U.S. Then we're going to get the second bank of the U.S. next, both very Rothschild related. It's only going to get crazier from here. We're going to do Lincoln after that, and then we're finally onto the Federal Reserve. If you enjoyed this episode, consider joining the Forbidden Book Society Patreon, where I go through each of the books that I used to make this content in a much more thorough way. So if you want to know more about this, if you feel like we only scratched the tip of the iceberg, which we kind of did in a lot of cases, check out the Forbidden Book Society on Patreon. The link's right here. Bing. I will see you there. Love y'all.